Siguiente vídeo al que quiero reaccionar. Quiero reaccionar a... Antes de Five Nights at Freddy's. La extraña belleza de Scott. La extraña belleza de los otros juegos de Scott Cawthon. No, el iceberg de Geometry Dash es muy largo. Para eso tengo que venir pronto y con palomitas. No tengo ni nada de eso. Así que vamos a... No se lo voy a ver entero porque son casi una hora de video. Pero bueno, como ya sabéis, Scott Cawthon ha comentado en este vídeo, hablando sobre, pues, qué opina de sus otros juegos. Y al fin y al cabo, nosotros hemos jugado a viejos juegos de Scott. Hemos jugado a Cheaper and Sons Lumber Company. Hemos jugado a parodias de sus juegos antiguos, como serían los de Doomsday Picnic, Night and Survive, There is no pause button, Dufas, entre alguno que otro. Quiero jugar algún día de Desolate Room y de Desolate Hope, que es donde aparece Coffee por primera vez, que luego aparecerá en FNAF World y en Help Wanted. Así que... vamos a ver el vídeo. Quiero decir, tengo curiosidad porque Scott Cawthon lo ha visto y quiero verlo. Así que... vamos a echar un vistazo. Está en inglés, pero bueno, yo os pongo los ¡Uy! Tiene subtítulos oficiales. ¡Qué rico! No es si lo veré entero, pero vamos a ver por encima del vídeo. Otro que tiene el volumen muy bajo.
Most people know that he made some mediocre Christian animation somewhere down the line, and the inspiration for Five Nights at Freddy's came from...
Animaciones cristianas mediocres.
What do you know about what Scott Cawthon made before Five Nights at Freddy's? Most people know that he made some mediocre...
Por cierto, el que ha creado esto se llama... Phil LeBrave en Twitter. Seguramente los que seáis mucho de Twitter lo conoceréis. He retuiteado muchas cosas suyas.
Inspiration for Five Nights at Freddy's came from a criticism of one of his older games about how some beavers look like scary animatronics, and that's about it. What if I told you, before FNAF, he also made this?
Esto lo hizo Scott, sí, es una pasada. FNAF vibes total, ¿eh? Y de ese volumen en general... Luego es un coñazo ponerlo bien otra vez, pero vale. Decidme... ¿así mejor?
About how some beavers look like scary animatronics, and that's about it. What if I told you...
¿así?
Before FNAF, he also made this.
Vale. De nada, locación. Sí, Phil LeBrave. Este es Phil LeBrave. Yo he hablado alguna que otra vez con él por Twitter. Nos seguimos.
And this.
Estoy hacia... Quiero pasarte un cover con IA muy bueno y chulo de FNAF 1 de Link Tombstone. No, ahora mismo no voy a reaccionar porque estamos con este. ¿Esto es una araña? Qué miedo. Que Scott haya modelado todo esto es brutal. Qué narices, tío.
And this.
Locación. Luego, cuando el directo se acaba, se supone que... bueno, se supone que ya puedes verlo. Está el vídeo, se queda guardado aquí 2 meses. No sé, puede que los haya gameplays.
These screenshots come from one of Scott's previous games, The Desolate Hope, released in 2012. The story of Scott Cawthon's other media is not well known.
Voy a poner un poco más de opacidad a esto. Voy a ponerlo al 75.
How does one man go from game developer obscurity, making barely enough money to support his family, to creating an enormously famous franchise whose first theatrical installment has made 10 times its original budget? This is a story about the history that led up to that spark of genius.
Qué bueno.
This is a story about the nature of success. Scott Cawthon's repertoire of non-Five Nights at Freddy's media spans 2 decades. It is broad in scope, style, and quality, and is full of fascinating and perplexing works of art, all of which are undeniably his. A quick disclaimer. Scott
Se ha probado con muchas cosas diferentes. Nunca ha tenido un estilo único.
Cawthon has made over 70 games.
Más de 70 juegos. Me gustaría un día jugar a todos. Aunque sé que hay algunos que son Lost Media o parcialmente Lost Media. Pero bueno, a todos los que se puedan molaría jugarlos. Muchos de ellos son de móviles. Tiene muchos juegos Scott Cawthon.
I did not reach the end of many of them. Some of them were literally unplayable, others required so much grinding that it would have taken me many months to complete them, and by that time I wouldn't have much to say because they are so similar to one another. Some of the games go on, literally, forever. I'll indicate which games I beat and which I didn't, but I made sure to learn as much as possible about the historically significant ones, and completed many of the lesser-known games as well. Also, most of these dates are based on Internet Archive web pages of the Daily Click, old iTunes and Android app pages, and Amazon pages. While I'm certain about the years in which these games were released, I can only say I tried my absolute best to make sure the month and day were correct based on the evidence provided. If new evidence comes out, some of these dates may change.
Qué guapo, tío, está muy chulo.
Oh my god, I'm afraid. I'm afraid.
What are you afraid of? Freddy Fazbear?
No.
Bachelor meals.
Well, fear no more, because that can all change
¿Qué?
with Cook Unity. Choose a subscription plan and select from hundreds of meals each week. I ordered a variety of meals from chefs of Cook
Me he
Unity.
rayado, digo, ¿qué es esto? Una promo.
Scott Cawthon's very first game is lost to
¿El primer juego de Scott Cawthon se ha perdido en la historia?
history. According to Cawthon, it involved a blue blob moving around the deck of a pirate ship, collecting red gems while menacing pirates ran around. All library graphics, of course, except the blob. I drew the blob. On Scott's Wikipedia, I believe it refers to this concept of a game as floppy disk, but I couldn't find a source stating that this was its name, or if it even came out in 1995.
Ah, curioso.
The first actual date we have is
La primera fecha que tienen es del 94, que es el Dufas, que fue reusado para la demo troll de UCN.
1994, when Scott Cawthon created the game Doofus, which starts like this.
Sweet!
Nah, Scott cocinaba antes también,
Doofus consists of a dinosaur controlled with your cursor that shoots at enemies and collects coins and gems. It's what you would expect from someone making a game in the early 90s when they were 16. This is what the end screen looks like.
Goodbye.
I swear this isn't a joke. This is the earliest piece of Scott Cawthon media we have, and it will be 20 years until he releases Five Nights at Freddy's. In 1996, Cawthon attended the Art Institute of Houston, where he learned computer animation and taught himself to make games using ClickTeam Fusion. The first version of ClickTeam Fusion, called Click and Play, was used to make Doofus.
Click and Play se llamaba antes ClickTeam.
Which means that ever since he was 16, Scott Cawthon has stuck with some version of ClickTeam Fusion to make all of his games, even his most recent release. He also used 3ds Max for all of his 3D modeling and even his 8-bit graphics.
Sí, los renders de pixel art también están hechos en modelos 3D. Raro, pero es así.
Soon you will learn that Scott Cawthon is a man of habit.
Es un hombre de hábitos, totalmente. Es algo que te das cuenta cuando hackeas los FNAFs.
Also, it's not out of the question that Scott Cawthon's setup has been a recliner, a laptop, and a small table for Diet Coke and Cheetos to create everything he has ever made.
¿Cómo?
It's not out of the question that Scott Cawthon's setup has been a recliner habit. Also, it's not out of the question that Scott Cawthon's setup has been a recliner, a laptop, and a small table for Diet Coke and Cheetos to create everything he has ever made. Yeah. 5 years later, Scott Cawthon created, animated, directed, wrote, and produced his first 3D animated shorts.
Bird Village.
Village Volume 1. And yes, he also voiced all of the characters.
Él le dio voz a todos.
Is the bad guy. He
Esa es la voz de Scott, ¿eh?
took Beak's bread.
By the way, how's the bread? Yeah, it's pretty putrid stuff, General.
The Bird Village film series is more interesting as a historical artifact than a piece of entertainment. Seeing the basic geometry, crispy textures, and simple animations is a quaint reminder of how far technology has come. I also saw this film through a crummy VHS rip on YouTube, which added to the nostalgic and worn-out aura of everything. For reference, an episode of VeggieTales in 1999 looked like this. So for an animation made entirely by one person, this doesn't seem too bad. In Stories from Bird Village, Beak's snowball fight is the first instance of what would become a defining feature of Cawthon's style. Throughout nearly every animation and video game he has ever made, there is an appearance of at least one crazy robot design.
En cada cosa que Scott creaba ya aparecía al menos un diseño de un robot loco. O sea que es como que esto de los animatrónicos lo tenía Scott en la sangre desde hace años.
And it's obvious that these are what he has the most fun making. In this animation, 2 snowman robots are specifically designed to participate in fights with military-level snowball fighting technology. There is a lot of charm to the Bird Village series, so much happens in each episode and there's a ton of creativity. But it's also rife with bad sound design. Scott Cawthon made 2 more Bird Village films after this. Not much is known about them because they are currently lost media.
Hay mucho los media.
Truman was discovered at the same time I was making this video.
Sí, lo descubrí hace poco.
The only evidence we have of it is a copyright entry. We have no idea what it is other than it was made in 2002. In the same year, Scott made a 3D art game creator called RPG Max. It is also currently lost media. The following media are all from 2003 and are all lost. RPG Max 2, Lost Island, Dynastria, Lost. RPG Max 2, Demon Knight, Dynastria, Dungeon, Elamage, Gunball, Lost Island, Mega Knight, War, and Ships of Chaos. Stellar Gun is a boss battle shooter with some wacky monsters that you shoot at until they explode. At the end of the game, you get to shoot at a PNG of Scott, which is unexpected.
Scott metiéndose... es como si me dan un penique por cada vez que Scott es el final boss de un juego suyo, tendría como 4. Pero es raro que tenga 4. Es raro que haya ocurrido 4 veces.
Otherwise, it's fine. A Mushnail Tale is his next animated film, and has a more dialogue
Yo he hackeado todos sus self-inserts, los tengo por ahí guardados.
heavy story with a more complex world that these really ugly Mushnail characters live in. The main Mushnail cast consists of Prispoo, Frupfoo, and Chupchu, who go on a quest to restore water to the drying lands of Mushnail, with the assistance of Grandpa and his wacky inventions. The animation is pretty bad, with a lot of clipping and stiff, simple movements. The writing, however, is surprisingly decent.
Then the wolf ate the chicken, and the wolf ate the butterfly, and the wolf lived happily ever after. Good night!
And there's a lot to appreciate, even if it looks primitive. Phantom Core is about a robot shooting things on the moon. The controls feel surprisingly natural, but unfortunately it kept crashing, so I couldn't get very far. Phantom Core 2 beta existed at some point, but it is currently lost media. The Fifth Paradox is a pretty unremarkable fantasy sci-fi RPG in a wonky MS Paint art style that will become familiar. The screen is very small, the designs and characters are kind of generic, but the style and cutscenes are endearing. Later in 2003, Scott released what he considered his first official game.
Legacy of Flan. Vamos a ver bastantes Legacies of Flans.
Legacy of Flan. Legacy of Flan
Legado
is a
del
very
Flan.
basic and short RPG where you collect different types of Flan that have various abilities and fight enemies you randomly encounter. You'll notice there are these sloppy, pixelated edges around every transparent
Creo que eso es porque son como GIFs, ¿no?
asset in the game.
Que no aguantan la transparencia. Y pues se ven los bordes así.
According to Alex Diaz on the Lost Scott
¿Cómo?
Games Discord, who's made games on ClickTeam Fusion, the reason this is so prevalent is because Scott imported his sprites in transparency mode, instead of exporting them from a 3D software in the alpha channel. This is a
Efectivamente.
consistent issue in nearly all of his early games, and it's hard to say why this is. Whether it was another weird choice he made, he couldn't figure out a better method, or he was just lazy. There aren't many notable monster or robot designs. For some of them, I have no earthly idea what they're supposed to be. However, the only boss
¡Oh, Dios! ¿Por qué el boss parece algo sacado de un libro de FNAF, tío? Es que te estaba charao ya, ¿eh?
is so much creepier and stranger than anything else in the game.
Mal rollo. Toda una estética similar y luego te meten este robot de pesadilla por la cara.
Legacy of Flan Online
Legacy of Flan Online.
is the sequel, and it's exactly like the first one, except it's online multiplayer and there's some more detailed mechanics, and the enemy modeling is improved. Legacy of Flan Storm of Hades is the next sequel. Again, pretty similar to the second,
Victor?
but the environments are much improved, and the system has more detailed mechanics. Return to Mushnail, The Legend of the Snowmill is where Scott Cawthon starts to really
Wow.
show off his environment modeling skills. And some of these environments are strangely beautiful in this primitive way. There's also another robot appearance. This time the robot is an invention of Grandpa that tries to capture the main characters and bring them home from their journey. At least, that's phase 1.
So what's phase 2?
Knock them out and drop them in the ocean.
Flanville is an online game which shakes things up a little in the Flan universe by adding homes you can fill with furniture to upgrade your attacks, jobs you can enroll in, and lots of minigames. Unfortunately, it runs pretty rough, and the layout was a little confusing, so I didn't get very far.
Huh.
Junkyard Apocalypse is a game I tried to play. I really tried. I tried several versions, I made a virtual machine for Windows XP,
Wow.
and I got it to run on there, but so slowly that it was unplayable. I couldn't figure it out. From what I could see in other playthroughs of the game, it's just a platformer shooter with some cool robot models on a very small screen. Moon Minions is another short RPG with this retro aesthetic I really like. These sherbert alien trees differentiate each environment, and every enemy creature's design is distinct. In fact, the final boss is this wacky amalgamation of all the enemies in the game. There's this gameplay element where you're
El enemigo final es una amalgama robótica de todos los otros monstruos. ¿Dónde habré visto eso también?
minion fighters absorb things that the enemies drop, which is pretty cool and makes you engage with the abilities of the enemies on
Wow.
a deeper level. Surprisingly, none of these games or movies have any explicit references to Christianity, which counters the misconception that Scott only produced Christian-themed content. It wasn't until 2004 that there was a shift towards making Christian media. Noah's Ark was a pleasant surprise. There are no huge improvements in the quality of the animation, but Cawthon's visual storytelling and sense of majesty in the environments is a huge step
Wow.
forward. This sequence where God is telling Noah to build the ark is kind of beautiful. And this sequence where you see whales swimming over mountains and fish swarming around the ark after the world has been flooded is sublime. And then it cuts to this. It will become increasingly obvious that Scott cannot model an appealing human to save his life. This is where I started to get a sense that either Scott has more skills or a preference for creating environments over human or humanoid characters. The Legend of the White Whale is the first video game entry to the Mushnail expanded universe. Again, it's a basic RPG that features our three main mushroom characters on a quest to find the White Whale. Just look at this menu screen, bro, it's the most gangster thing I've ever seen. The jagged
Wow.
black pixel borders are still here, there are a few cool monster designs,
What?
and the final boss is Grandpa, who is now straight up fine with killing his grandchildren to protect the white whale.
Dios.
Since I played this game using modern Windows and I hadn't configured things correctly, dialogue, text, and items couldn't be seen unless I wiggled my cursor over them rapidly, which added some extra challenge, I guess. Still, there were some technical errors on Scott's part, including misspellings. Overall, not that remarkable, but sometimes fun to play.
Scott hace muchos typos. En el FNAF también hay.
Flawnville 2 has better graphics and works pretty
Baker?
similar to the first one. You can collect Flawn gems among other items, and again, there's a lot of minigames. That's about it.
Ese...
Chup's Quest is the
¿Qué
sequel
ha pasado? Ese juego lo veríamos... Ese minijuego lo vemos... Este minijuego lo vemos... En el Taikan Sons. El fangame.
That's about it. Chup's Quest is the sequel to The White Whale, and the gameplay is very different, but it's essentially a Zelda clone.
Total.
I didn't like this game at all, and I had
Un
no
suscriptor
interest
muy
in
menso
completing.
dice: Hola jeje, ¿cómo estás? Twitch de mier, no me avisaron ni por Discord que prendías. En fin, estoy
¿Qué?
aquí. ¿Estás viendo un
¿En
vídeo,
serio?
Scott? ¿Y de
Se
setas?
supone que mi server de Discord avisa siempre. Estamos viendo un vídeo de los antiguos juegos de Scott.
It. All you do is swing your sword at things and constantly try to find your way around boring as hell mazes. It's repetitive and a real drag. There's barely any story either, so it's just kind of pointless. Mini Metroid is a short Metroid.
Buah, el de aquí en este juego creo que también estaba un self-insert de Scott como boss.
Metroidvania style game where halfway through you crash into a level based on Super Mario. Metroid Ripped Worlds is a longer
Ah, no, era en este.
version of this game where you crash through levels based on other famous games. At some point, you get to a level where you can shoot
los
at
hijos de
pictures of
Scott.
Scott Cawthon's children and even Scott Cawthon himself. This is one of the strangest of his games in that there's nothing really else like it in his backlog. The Pilgrim's Progress is an hour and 5-minute long Christian animated film based on the 1698 novel of the same name by John Bunyan. It follows Christian, a troubled Christian who learns about God and Christian
Pilgrim
virtues in order
Progress.
to get to the Celestial City. This film is Scott's longest attempt at a narrative-driven animated movie, and it has a lot of the same problems as his previous films. The voice acting is almost entirely Scott.
Christian! Christian! Why did you not come in at the small gate at the start of this path?
Ah, who has the time? The water is the gospel of Christ. With it, the room was cleaned.
The human characters look amateurish. The highlight of this movie is that, let's just say, subtlety is not in this film's vocabulary.
Well, yes, the Celestial City is the other direction.
Oh, really? My name is Atheist. I once thought like you. I searched for the Celestial City as well, and let me assure you, no such place exists on this earth.
That's not Scott's fault, as the book seems to be equally as blunt. There are a few creature designs that are really cool. He essentially makes Christian fight in a Dark Souls boss battle. It's very charming. There are some funny moments, but the rest of the movie is a slog. Light from Above was made available to play on Clicktopia extremely recently. It's also one of Scott's first explicitly Christian games. The game is an incomplete first-person RPG, and is very bare bones. It seems to have a system that is like a prototype for the Pilgrim's Progress game, which would be made 5 years later. Bogart is a standard 2D platformer that is done in Scott's signature MS Paint style. It's kind of fun, and the difficulty really ramps up in the later levels. I couldn't complete it, I got a little heated.
Se ha cabreado.
Oh, God! The main issue was the controls were a little weird, where shift is jump and Z is attack.
Lo sé,
and
Catnap,
every
lo
time
sé.
you got a power up, you
Está muy
must
bien.
use that power up instead of your usual whip attack.
¿Cuándo
Bogart 2,
sale
The
Xbox en
Return
mayo o
of
marzo?
Bogart has an upgrade in
No se sabe.
graphics, but besides
Creo.
that, it's almost the same as Bogart 1.
Creo que
The
dijeron
main
primavera, ¿no?
improvement is that pressing Z is a whip attack and pressing X uses
O
the
no hay
power
fecha,
up.
que no hay fecha.
Again, couldn't complete it out of frustration and the fact that neither of the games save your progress if you close them.
No.
The Misadventures of Siegfried the Elf on Tuesday Night is another 2D platformer, but instead of long
Castlevania.
side-scrolling levels, there's a main area and a bunch of levels that connect to it. You can return to the main area and use new abilities to gain access to different areas. The MS Paint art style has been getting more and more refined with each game, and this one is no exception. The menu is kind of a beautiful piece of pixel art in itself. This game is more fun to play than the others in that you have a lot more freedom of movement and you can stack power-ups, but I got bored of it fairly quickly as I explored and realized it was going to have roughly the same level gimmicks and platforming as all his other games. A Christmas Journey is Scott Cawthon's stab at a Christmas movie, briefly mentioned on Best of the Worst, and one of the most clipped in Scott Cawthon Funny Moments compilations. If there's one thing you can't say about Scott Cawthon's other works, you can't say they're pretentious. Like most Christmas movies, this one is about discovering the true meaning of Christmas. Ian and his sister Steffi are stuck at their weirdly cynical grandpa's
Momento FNAF.
house for the holiday, when an angel comes down and guides them through a tour of their neighborhood and explains the Christian perspective on what Christmas should be about, showing kindness and generosity and celebrating the birth of Jesus and whatnot. Unlike other Christmas movies, this one has a unique sense of humor that you won't find anywhere else.
Green beans and cream corn?
Green beans and cream corn. Every Christmas the good town folk leave cans of that stuff on our doorstep. 'Tis the season for free food. I guess they think we're poor. And vegetarian.
Grandpa, some of these cans expired before I was born.
You're gonna expire if you don't listen to what I say.
Weird Colony Online First Strike is a game Scott made and then quickly abandoned. It is currently lost. Weird Colony is a multiplayer RPG consisting of different battling races that is also currently lost. After Noah's Ark, The Pilgrim's Progress, and A Christmas Journey were completed, Scott Cawthon joined Hope Animation in 2007. There, the website would promote the independently made animated films. The only Christian film Scott made that's not on the Hope Animation website is Bible Plays, which Scott refused to publish there after the founder of Hope Animation made a remark about Scott's animation quality that Scott may or may not have misunderstood as a criticism.
Interesante.
Legacy of Flan 4, Rising Flan, is another Flan RPG. The graphics have improved a little, but there are still things about it that come across
Sí,
as
Catnap,
kind
sí,
of
te he dicho que
lazy.
sí.
For example, the enemies are positioned in neat rows with their animations all synced up, which makes it look really artificial. Even the title graphic looks a little half-assed. Aside from that, it's just another probably okay RPG that would require a lot of grinding to complete. Moon looks much better than most of his previous games so far. It's another 2D platformer, but this time with minimaps. The robot you play as has a cool drill animation, but you rarely use it, so it's a bit of a waste. As you play as has a cool drill animation, but you rarely use it, so it's a bit of a waste as you spend most of your time tediously shooting at the
Gummy
monsters.
worms.
The first stage of the last boss does have this
Dios, ¿qué es eso?
strangely haunting design, so that's a plus. The Desolate Room features the first appearance of an endoskeleton.
The Desolate Room. Entramos en la precuela de The Desolate Hope, la primera aparición de un endoesqueleto hecho por... es de Mimic.
And this game is where we get an abundance of Cawthon's signature robot designs. One robot, Coffee, explores a small island collecting eggs for his dead robot friend Alphys. This game is another short RPG that tackles some more sci-fi themes, such as viruses and hacking. The game works on a charge system, where you wait for your fighter's charge bars to fill up to make an attack. The more you charge up, the better attacks you can get. The trick is you have to balance this with enemies that also charge up in a similar way. It becomes an exercise in managing what resources you can spend, and building up charge before the enemy can deplete your health bar. The areas where you fight enemies and also where you spend the most time are entirely a 2D game within the 3D overworld. The gameplay is engaging enough for the amount of time you play, but there's really not much to do after you've figured out a build that works. Ifermoon is what Scott considers his first professional game. This
Su primer juego profesional, Ifermoon.
game was fascinating in its
De Ifermoon había teasers en scottgames.com.
mechanics and
Hace
visuals.
años.
The gameplay works on a charge system similar to the Desolate Room, except there's another mechanic where you can set each character to battle, defense, or a mix of both, but I didn't have a need to touch this until one
Myth.
boss, where, in a twist, dealing offensive damage to the boss actually heals it, so I had to set all my characters on defense. The character models for the aliens and humanoid beings are pretty uncanny like always, but the art direction of each environment is astounding.
Los escenarios de Scott son muy bonitos.
And I often had a hard time believing one person modeled, textured, and lit everything I was seeing.
La textura de nube, la textura del Perlin Noise está en todo,
My favorite environment is Clockmort's lair, which is full of crazy gears and robot designs. Unfortunately, reading dialogue in this game is a drag, and Scott's writing abilities were just not there yet. Worse is that there's a lot of dialogue to read. The plot is revealed to be a Christian allegory that leaves you with more confusion with the state of the world than before the reveals in the story. And finally, while the fights in the game are fun, some require a lot of tedious resource gathering beforehand. Clearly, this game is a lot more polished than...
Hola jeje, soy el Mr. Beast, ¿te acuerdas del Extreme Classic que me estaba pasando en GD?
Sí.
Pues luego de más de un año me lo pasé, tengo un destacado que me hace ilusión que lo veas y me digas qué piensas, SRRY por la...
Ah, muchas por los bits. Vale, pásamelo.
...and as others, but it's hard to get into. There's a secret boss in the game called the Piper.
Un boss
Who you
secreto.
can only get to by pressing down behind a certain column in the castle. I tried him on the highest levels I got in the game, and I was killed pretty instantly.
Lol.
I couldn't beat the Piper, no one in the Scott Games Discord has ever beaten the Piper. As far as I can tell,
Nadie venció a Piper.
no one has ever recorded themselves beating the Piper.
No existen grabaciones de nadie venciendo a Piper. O sea, ya sabéis qué es lo que hay que hacer.
Screw 50-20 mode, try beating the Piper. So that only leaves some crazy soul out there to try. In 2009, Scott Cawthon animated several science and education shorts for Rock and Learn. Keep in mind, he only animated them, and had no hand in the writing or voice acting. We don't have any other games or movies from this year. The Jesus Kids Club is an animated series of short stories of kids who use Christian teachings in their daily lives. It's a very cute work with many zany moments that even has a story based on events in Scott Cawthon's real life. The animation has noticeably improved, but again, the humans are still uncanny. We get to see
¿Vas a jugar a Hyper Moon? Eventualmente lo jugaremos.
more of Cawthon's signature maximalist robot designs in the form of toys, and even some references to an upcoming game.
Lol.
Bible Plays is very hard to hate. I say it's
He visto episodios de Bible Play. Está bien.
hard to hate because it is so genuine. Bible Plays 1 and Bible Plays 2 are short animations that consist of a rehearsal of a school play that recounts various Bible stories. While it is aimed at a child audience, it is surprisingly funny, even as an adult.
Can we get back to our story, please?
He must build his boat.
This is not a musical.
I must build my boat.
Say hello to the trapdoor.
And while Scott's style of humor may not be for everyone, its complete lack of self-righteousness sets it apart from other lesser Christian media. It's just a father and his kids making goofy shorts.
¿Alguna vez jugaste a ese juego que se creó una copia de FNAF, el que es Animatronics? Sí. Está en GG Games. De hecho, hicimos un par de directos pasándonoslo. No me gustó nada. Odié el primer juego. No sé si llegué a jugar el segundo, pero el primero lo odié, pero mucho. Grande, Mr. Buster. ¿Jugaste al 2? Creo que no. Odié el 1. Odié mucho el 1. Buah, lo odié mucho. Mucho me tenéis que pedirlo el 2 para que lo juegue. Espero que esté mejor que el primero, no me gustó nada.
And that tone emanates through the amateur voice acting, the hand-drawn assets, and the endearing simplicity of it all. It's easily one of my favorite animations from Scott Cawthon. Powermon is a parody of Pokemon, where you explore Powermon Island and fight battles with your Powermon, all while chasing a deranged clown guy. Apparently, Scott Cawthon made this as a Christmas gift for his kids and then released it. It's a charming game, but not that captivating. Doomsday Picnic is the most fun to play of Scott Cawthon's 2D platformers by
De aquí salen los Freddy in Space.
a mile. In the game, you play as Scott himself or any of the other side
Creo que se nota, ¿no?
characters once you unlock them, battling evil clones of Scott's picnic buddies. The gameplay is wacky and loose, the MS Paint art style is
El 2 es muy bueno. En noviembre sale el 4. ¿Y el 3?
unashamedly goofy, and the levels are unique
entrado ni
and
que
full
un
of
3.
copyright infringement. It's great.
El buen Sonic.
Scott's
Será
other
F-Man.
game levels were pretty predictable. You always had an ice level, a fire level, a desert level, but this
Lo clásico.
one has a cheese level.
Ah, uno
My
de
only
queso.
critique is that the
Como
bosses
como
could
en Friends Space 3.
use more health, because sometimes with certain power-ups, I barely had a chance to see what the boss's attacks were before they went down.
Wow.
I enjoyed the Pilgrim's Progress video game way more than the movie.
El juego.
Yeah, the obvious messaging is still corny, but I think the video game embraces the
¡Ey! Aquí es donde apareció por primera vez Soul Dozer.
corniness a lot more. I think my favorite part of the game is that you can buy money. There's even a speedrun of this
Comprar
game
dinero.
where you can reach heaven in under 3 minutes. This is really
LOL.
where Scott's imagination when creating sick enemy designs and environments
Pasada,
shines through, and it's the strongest part of the game.
Ah, que ya salió el capítulo 4.
I mean, just look at these visual feasts. The human characters are still the weakest designs, and the contrast between the quality of the humans and the quality
The Desolate Room es un juego de Scott.
of the monsters never ceases to confuse
Venom.
me. The RPG elements are fairly basic, but enjoyable enough to keep my attention. While the messaging of the narrative works for the most part, the messaging of the RPG elements falls flat. At the end of the day, once you play enough, concepts like grace, power, truth just devolve into numbers that don't mean anything. In New Game Plus, I want to be able to play as Jesus, go full-on Son of God mode, and beat the absolute piss out of every enemy I encounter. That would make it the best game of this century, no competition. Slumberfish is Scott Cawthon's
Este es de móvil, ¿no?
first mobile game,
Sí.
and is a cut-the-rope style puzzle game
Me acuerdo cuando antes Scott tenía públicos, cuando sacó FNAF 1 en móvil los juegos. De un montonazo de ellos.
where you try and maneuver a beach ball into a goal using different kinds of sea creatures. It's okay. Slumberfish catching Z's is exactly the same as Slumberfish, except there's this diving suit guy that guides you, and you collect Z's. It's okay. Finally, we have arrived at
The
the
Desolate Hope!
The Desolate Hope is Scott's best non-Five Nights at Freddy's game. Many have said it is his masterpiece out of all the non-FNAF games.
La garra de Scrap Baby, ¿la habéis visto?
Many have said it is his masterpiece out of all the non-FNAF games, and I am in agreement. Not only is it a massive improvement over the Desolate Room, it is also a fascinating game on its own. On Lune Infinus, a station in the middle of space, is a coffee robot simply named Coffee, who has activated a program to help remove a virus from the station. There are 5 derelicts in the base. 2 of the derelicts are these bizarre and perforated robots. The other 2 look like classic robot toys blown up and given extra detail, complete with vacuum tubes and tooth claws. The last one is a frozen and abandoned metallic giant. While Malens and Mirad are the most striking and look kind of sinister, they all help you on your mission. Sometimes these maximalist environments are breathtaking, and sometimes the environments are the ugliest thing you've ever seen. Each derelict has command over a simulation
Las casas de FNAF World.
in which they try to recreate human life in their own special way, according to their personalities and interests.
Qué
For
loco.
example, Mirad is more interested in the spiritual, and so they create these half-finished ghost beings. The bosses or viruses that invade these simulations all have crazy and disorienting designs that look like they could come straight out of a sci-fi Dark Souls game. The entire game is pouring with imagination, and it's no wonder that Scott spent 2 years working on it. That is, to this day, the longest Scott has spent on a single game.
Wow.
At the beginning of my playthrough, I had many difficulties with learning the mechanics, but as I progressed through the game, they became more natural to me, and the game revealed itself to be a lot more balanced than I initially thought. After beating it, there's still some moments of frustration that stick out to me, and I think fixing them could have made this a more enjoyable experience. The game has day and night cycles. During the day, you can access simulations, which includes platforming, top-down shooting, upgrades, and bosses. During the night, as far as I'm aware, you only have one option: walking in a straight line and picking up collectibles to level up the derelicts. These nights are tedious, and the only thing that would change about them was if you went out enough, a Space Invader-like minigame would pop up which would allow you to collect some extra resources. I found this minigame immersion-breaking, as it didn't really match the real-world environment and was not a satisfying secondary task. The night clock is about twice as fast as the day one, so it's not a big deal, but this part of the game just wasn't that fun. The charge-based boss battles are the highlight of the game, and the more you play them, the more you can understand and utilize everything that pops up on the ridiculously busy battle screen. There's a part where you play several mini-games to get power-ups while fighting the boss. It's insane. It's overwhelming in the best possible way, and by the time you make it to the end, you're so plugged in to how the system works, and the final boss is so intense and fast-paced that beating it made me feel like a god.
Wow. Tío, me han entrado ganas de jugarlo, ¿eh?
However, in many ways, The Desolate Hope is a bittersweet game. As you battle viruses,
No quiero spoilers, ¿eh?
the simulations you enter start to break down more and more. You only have 15 days of power left in the base until it all shuts down. I'll try to be vague with my spoilers here, but at the end of the game, Scott beautifully renders each of the derelicts in these rooms that you have seen time and time again throughout the entire game. Once lively and full of lights, buttons, and screens, now silent, forever cold and dormant in the vastness of space.
No me paséis links del case, ya sé dónde se encuentran, chicos, tranquilos.
And yet, it seems, in the end, all your struggles and all these robot sacrifices are worth it.
Esto es cine.
According to Scott Cawthon, while his Christian games and animations got good reviews, none of them were financially successful. In fact, he started to have a crisis of faith from the lack of financial success, even going so far as expressing suicidal thoughts to his doctor. He had been working in retail and would work as a cashier at Dollar General, even as late as 2014. From here on out, Scott Cawthon began putting his energy into making shorter mobile games that could be produced more quickly. Quote, anything to bring an extra $40 to $50 a month. This is where his games get a lot more experimental, and in the case of his mini slot machine games, a lot lazier. Now, since Scott removed most of these next games from app stores a long time ago, how do you play them? Here's the thing. You
can!
You can't! Okay, you can, but not easily. There's a collection of APK files.
Buah, yo tiene un montón de esos juegos, tío, en el móvil. ¿Tendré por ahí el APK? Puede ser. A lo mejor tengo algún juego que es los media por ahí guardado. Who knows? No sabía que Scott había tenido pensamientos suicidas. ¿Qué cojones?
Files on the Internet Archive that I tried to play on my Windows 11 PC. First by trying out BlueStacks 5, then BlueStacks 3, then Android Studio, and then I took the problem to a computer scientist friend and he got me BitLocked out of my own laptop.
Dios.
Until finally, I just ordered a 2013 Android phone off of eBay and screen recorded that. There Is No Pause Button is a non-stop platformer that requires some pretty precise jumping. You get 999 lives, and every time you die, you get sent back to the beginning of the level you completed with no rest breaks. It's fun, but challenging. This is also where we get Scott's famous profile
De ahí salió el icono de Animdude.
picture. Use Holy Water is a... Jesus Christ, we have like 30 more games to get through. Okay, Use Holy Water is a mindless shooter game with zombies, vampires, and skeletons. It's fine. 20 Useless Apps is Scott at his most comedic. Some of these count as actual games, but they're as basic as a game can get. Some are just so beyond stupid, they actually got a laugh out of me a few times.
El juego de Alba Mayo. Be
Some
like.
are just so beyond stupid, they actually got a laugh out of me a few times.
Dos en rayo.
I mean, it's exactly what
Simulador de poner un huevo.
it says. What else could I ask for? Strangely enough, we have to take an abrupt detour here because near the beginning of 2013, Scott Cawthon made his first piece of horror media. Not Five Nights at Freddy's and not even a game,
¿Ya hizo un juego de terror antes de
but
FNAF?
an electronic book titled The Tearing,
What?
which is about a series of child murders in an orphanage. I know, crazy. I would not have believed it if Scott himself had not confirmed its existence.
Hola. ¡Hala! Y está perdido.
Forever Quester is barely a game, but is kind of interesting. It's just an automatic quest RPG where you get alerts of what your knight is doing on his trip, and sometimes you can buy things for him. I don't really get it, it seems pretty boring. Rage Quit is just like there is no pause button, but on top of jumping you can slide, and if you die 10 times, the game will rage warp you to the next level. I've never seen a game do that before. Fun, but challenging. Cropple is a puzzle piece game where you try to clear your garden using crops that can only be planted like Tetris pieces. It's fine, I kind of got into it. Golden Galaxy is a game comprised of Desolate Hope levels that have been reconfigured for a side-scrolling shooter. It's fun enough, but I got stuck when I kept getting killed by a gear obstacle that I couldn't seem to get past. Vegas Fantasy Jackpot just has assets of Scott's other games, but put into a slot machine. The gameplay is you click spin, and if you get a matching row, you get video game money. Vegas Wild Slots is just a classic generic slot machine game. Aquatic Critter Slots is the same, except sometimes there are bonus mini-games in between, and you can buy fish to fill up an aquarium.
Oh, eso me gusta a mí.
It's cute. That's about it. Mafia Slot Machine and Scott's Fantasy Slots are both unavailable, but I did get to play a version of them. Platinum Slots Collection is just a collection of other slot machine games, but all the winnings go to one place. This collection also has shorter versions of Mafia Slot Machine and Scott's Fantasy Slots. Bad Waiter Tip Calculator is unavailable. We don't even have an image for it.
Tengo traumas, con los tragaperras.
Pimp My Dungeon is a resource management is unavailable. We don't even have an image for it. Pimp My Dungeon is a resource management game with a satirical twist. You play as the dungeon master, placing traps to damage the hero. It's fun, but I don't think I'm itching to play it some more. Spooky Scan is an app made for detecting, attracting, or repelling the spirits that lurk in the darkness. It is currently unavailable. I have some downtime now. It's been a day, so maybe I'll try that Forever Quester thing again. Oh hey, my knight gained over 1,000 gold and 1,500 XP while I was away, and caught a bunch of fish? Now I can buy more things and advance into the next area. Oh. Well played, Scott.
Ah, es un juego de no jugar.
Well played.
Chipper and Sons Lumber Company.
Finally,
llegamos.
I made it to Chipper & Sons Lumber Company. In this game, Tyke is the son of a beaver who owns a lumber company. You go around the area collecting items from friendly creatures and using plans and land your father gives you to build structures which produce more wood. It's another acceptable mobile game with a lot of charm. I do like seeing more of Scott's humor, like how Tyke's father sets his son up on dates with the completely wrong species. The modeling has improved a little. All the animal environments of this world are cute.
Tío, que seguir el juego, es una
The main
pasada.
mechanic of just watering trees until they grow large and harvesting them for lumber, and building costlier and costlier things like AFK lumber bots to harvest more and more lumber, to use to make costlier and costlier structures, is an obvious time waster, as was common in many mobile games at the time. The
Tío, es un vicio este juego.
criticism of the characters being creepy I do agree with, but at this point I was so used to Scott's art style that it didn't bother me at all.
Claro, es que para este entonces, ya si has jugado todo lo que ha jugado Scott, esto ya no da miedo. ¡Hostia! ¿Cómo está lloviendo? Oh.
The main issue is that it's just not that fun, and that combined with the fact that characters look a little uncanny, it's not hard to imagine.
War. Muchas gracias, Raciel, por
16
esos
meses
16
FNAF Peluche FNAF Calambre.
Muchas gracias. Chicos, ¿escucháis la lluvia con el otro micro?
¿La escucháis?
Muy bien, muy bien. Me gusta la lluvia.
And that combined with the
Pelusei
fact that
Fugas dice, jeje, va a suceder otra vez.
Esperamos que no.
characters look a little uncanny, it's not hard to imagine why this game couldn't get greenlit by Steam. VIP Woodland Casino is based on Chipper
No fue aceptado en Steam.
& Sons Lumber Company, and it's like all the other slot machine games, except it has one of the wildest intros in a Scott Cawthon game.
¿Qué?
Okay, kiddo, so your father has gotten himself into a bit of trouble. So the Termite King opened this new casino, very shiny, and you know how beavers like shiny things. Well, long story short, I may have gambled away a little bit of our savings.
No.
And your college tuition.
No.
And our home,
¿Qué?
the deed to the forest, etc., etc. That's why I'm counting on you to win back the forest from the termites.
What?
This is one of the worst fathers in fiction.
Totalmente.
Jumbo Slots Collection is
Soy
just
Tichi Gamer 03 LOL dice. Jeje, acá en Argentina llueve igual, espero que no pase otra vez,
a
saludos
huge
crack.
Nah, no hace viento.
collection of the other slot machines and is currently unavailable. Bible Story Slots and Hawaiian Jackpots are both from 2014
No way. Pineapple on Pizza reference.
and are
Alba, yo le copio a Scott.
currently unavailable. 8-Bit RPG Creator is a small game creator. I gotta give props to Scott, this is a simple and intuitive app, and I know getting something this complicated to work intuitively is tough. I probably couldn't make something amazing or that custom with this, but I did have fun creating levels for the hour or so I spent with it. Anyway, here's the game I made, everyone.
A ver. ¿Qué? Crasheo.
Fighter Mage Bard is the first
Ah, aquí. De aquí sale el FNAF World Halloween Edition.
appearance of this lined pixel art Atari-like graphics. The game is a basic RPG,
El original Death Minigame.
just like many others. Chubby Hurdles is a truly aggravating game where you have to get a fat man over hurdles extremely slowly with very precise jumps.
What?
It's captivating for about 20 minutes. Pogo Duck is about a duck on a pogo stick jumping from podium to podium. You press on the screen and you shoot straight down to hit a podium. Stars make you go faster. It's very simple and fine for what it is. Magnum Slots Collection is an even bigger collection of slot machines and is currently unavailable. 8-Bit RPG
FD89YF Dafton dice. Jeje, porque no puedes poner un botón para banear personas al azar por 5 minutos y por 100 puntos.
¿Por qué no quiero eso?
Creator Zombies Attack and Cuddly Creatures are both currently unavailable. Finally,
Además, sería un problema.
I made it to the game you've all been waiting for. The game that defined a generation. Fart Hotel. This game is
Fart Hotel.
essentially Guess Who, but for farts, where you try to read the facial expressions to guess who farted in a certain amount of time.
What?
Obviously, Scott Cawthon's most cerebral game. Just take a listen to the title theme. Guys, I promise we're almost done. Gemsa is like
El
Candy Crush,
pináculo de
but
los
with
juegos
far
de
less
Scott.
strategy. It's kind of relaxing, but ultimately Candy Crush, but with far less strategy. It's
Gemsa.
kind of relaxing, but ultimately pointless. Shell Shatter is just Gemsa, but with shells and dirt. Dark Prisms is currently unavailable, but I think I can guess what it's like. Can you? Kitty in the
Kitty. Esta aparecería en Flying Space.
Crowd is Where's Waldo, but for kittens, and it is delightful. Too bad there's only one image they hide in, because after you find them all the first time, it gets pretty boring. Sit and Survive is a game...
Papafea 12
Sit and
dice.
Survive.
Jeje, ¿a ti te gusta escuchar la lluvia?
Sí.
A mí me encanta escucharla.
Sí, a mí también. Sit and Survive. Sister Location, mature audiencias.
where you sit in what is apparently the most hazardous campsite in the world and
El lugar de camping más peligroso del mundo.
buy things at the end of every...
¿Cuándo vas a subir un nuevo vídeo de FNAF? Pronto. Pronto volveremos a la rutina.
Night to help you survive the next night. It's a constant balancing act where you try to anticipate certain dangers, such as bugs, bears, acid rain, lightning, and even zombies, while not spending too much money to survive as many nights as possible. It's a game with a strong premise and a strong execution. It's very fun and kept my attention for a while. It's one of the few games where I actually want to play it more after this video. It's one of his best mobile games, and it would soon be proven Scott Cawthon had a knack for this type of resource management game design. This is it. This is the last game released before August 8th, 2014. 3 months and 3 days remain.
Five Nights at Freddy's.
Within those 3 days, Jim Sterling, a fairly well-known video game journalist and YouTuber, posts this video.
Terrifying. It's just all over the fucking place, and that thing looks like it's gonna kill your children.
But there are a few comments, some of the oldest comments on the video, who make even more specific remarks. Jim Sterling also mentions that the Greenlight Steam page was taken down the day before by Scott Cawthon himself. The criticism had gotten to him.
Whoa.
Playing through all these games brought me to a few key revelations. FNAF World is not some out-of-left-field RPG he randomly made. It's the rule, not the exception.
Efectivamente, qué bueno.
This is what he...
FNAF World es lo que él hacía antes de FNAF, pero con FNAF. Creemos que era la excepción, pero era la norma en realidad. La excepción siempre fue FNAF.
Usually makes. A majority of Scott Cawthon's other games and films are not Christian. They're just weird. When Scott made the first 4 Five Nights at Freddy's games within a few months of each other, that's not him just rushing out games to capitalize on a successful franchise. That's just his regular output rate. For nearly every year of his career, he would make at least 3 or more games or films regardless of if they were successful or not. He's just a prolific maniac. Many of his games have recurring tropes. Many of his games contain mini-games. Iffermoon features games within games in the form of literal in-universe arcade machines. A lot of his games have loading time and sound design issues, which is unusual considering Five Nights at Freddy's 1 has such strong sound design. A lot of his games are brisk and easy to mild in difficulty for the first 2/3, and then have bosses that shoot up in difficulty near the end. The music choices are always on point and fit the in-game environments. It's crazy how much foreshadowing there seems to be for Five Nights at Freddy's, from all the bear-looking creatures in the backgrounds, to the fact that so many of his designs just look like animatronics. While researching for this video, I got this overwhelming sense that if it was not for FNAF, all these animations, all these games would have been doomed to obscurity. It's kind of a miracle we have most of these games still. It's even more of a miracle that most of them are playable. This whole thing, the only reason we have most of these past projects is because of a few dedicated people who are working entirely for free simply because they care. Scott Cawthon just kept deleting stuff and moving on, and while I get that as an artist, it can be frustrating for other people on the search for knowledge about these works. The only reason we know a lot of these games even existed is because the Internet Archive's Wayback Machine can let us look at old posts on the Scott Games website. Being able to not just find, but also restore media to a playable or watchable condition is invaluable. And it just leaves me wondering, if the backlog of one of the most famous game developers of the 21st century has this little covering it, has all this stuff still missing, imagine what else is out there.
Wow.
People like to talk a lot about how Five Nights at Freddy's 1, 2, 3, and 4 are flawed but otherwise good games that undeniably changed the indie game landscape. While I agree that the second, third, and fourth games have plenty that can be critiqued, and I kind of lost interest after the fourth and everything since then looks kind of bad, I will always defend FNAF 1. I think the first Five Nights at Freddy's is one of the few pieces of art that is a perfect execution of its premise. Okay, maybe not perfect for some of the tiny nonsensical gameplay and story details, but for everything else, basically perfect. I cannot think of any major critique I could levy at it that would make it any better without jeopardizing some other integral aspect. A simple point-and-click game about a Chuck E. Cheese parody filled with haunted and or malfunctioning animatronics cannot be executed any better than this. It's like, of all the thousands of possible decisions that could be made, Scott Cawthon miraculously made the correct one for every element. The story is hinted at just enough that it leaves your mind wandering. The animatronics have iconic designs that delicately walk the line between being just cutesy enough to look like children's mascots, and uncanny enough that under the right lighting conditions they are frightening. I've seen hundreds of pieces of fan art that have tried to redesign the original 4 characters, and all of them fall just short of the originals in this aspect. Finally, the atmosphere is immaculately crafted through the sound design, the static, the random noises, the fan, the modeling and texture of every detail in the pizzeria. It looks like an obscure game straight out of the 90s and early 2000s. Because in a way, it is. Five Nights at Freddy's 1 uses nostalgia and turns it on its head so perfectly because Scott Cawthon has specialized in this nostalgic, uncanny, primitive, but endearing art style for years. That's one of the reasons FNAF 1 took the world by storm. FNAF got so popular because there was truly nothing else like it. Five Nights at Freddy's is a work of genius. As we've gone through these works, there's been hints of genius, hints of something that goes beyond how otherwise unremarkable most of these games and movies are, but nothing groundbreaking. Don't get it twisted, I don't want to imply all this other work was just a waste of time, because it wasn't. Nearly every work Cawthon made built on the last in some way. When I look at these 2 decades of work, I see a huge chunk of someone's lifetime. I can imagine all the late nights, all the error messages, the dry eyes, all the frustration over years and years.
Autor Shroomlock. Scott.
Building up to make better and better games and animations. The Desolate Hope is Scott's best game next to the FNAF series, and in terms of strictly gameplay, I got a lot more out of the Desolate Hope than FNAF 1. Sit and Survive is addicting to play. Bible Plays and A Christmas Journey are full of charming and hilarious moments. The environments in Iffermoon and The Pilgrim's Progress are breathtaking. And this enormous library of badass designs is nothing to scoff at. For 10 years, Scott has relied on the Five Nights at Freddy's brand in one form or another. I want to see him take a chance again on any of his other wacky ideas, another work using all of the skills and resources he has now. Scott Cawthon once said, "Never take for granted how special it is to have a group of people who are eager to play what you make." I can't read his mind, but I sense that maybe Scott is or was afraid that if he makes something not connected to the FNAF brand, no one will play it or he'll lose a part of his audience. In reality, there is a group of people who have taken time out of their day over and over again to find and restore non-FNAF related games, just to play them. You can't stop these non-FNAF related games, just to play them. You can't stop these people from playing these games. Scott Cawthon isn't a slave to Five Nights at Freddy's, and this community proves it. Scott Cawthon is not a genius. I don't mean that as an insult. The fact he's not a genius is way more inspiring. Clearly he has talent, but his old animations and games have their fair share of problems.
What?
He was persistent. He released over 70 games before his first big hit. He has strengths in some areas and weaknesses in others. Five Nights at Freddy's 1 plays to his strengths. The game has no human characters in it. The player does not move in 3D space. The writing only hints at the story. There are no complex animations, and it's simple and intuitive enough that at the end of the day, even if it's not scary to you, it's still easy to get into and fun to play. Even small things, like having the exposition of the story be told through a phone message, as opposed to reading a long written message, like was common in many of his other games, helps you get into the story faster and more naturally. Scott Cawthon knew his limitations and played the cards he had cultivated. That is what makes the first game a work of genius. The right set of skills, paired with the right idea at the right time, can make all the difference in the world. And that's good news, because it proves that being successful is not something you have to be born with. It doesn't have to be some dormant trait that is only effortlessly eked out once you find your one true passion. Scott Cawthon worked hard, and he failed many times, for almost 2 decades. Success for him was not an inevitability. He could have easily surrendered to stagnation, making the same types of games and animations for the rest of his life. Worse, he could have easily let it go altogether. But he knew his heart wouldn't take it. Scott Cawthon loves making games. So he adapted. He kept going. I cannot imagine being on the internet 10 years ago without Five Nights at Freddy's. And it's all because
El Manuel
in the spring of
836 dice, GG Games fue tu primer canal o ya tenías otro?
Ahí había alguno más, pero son los media.
One man saw criticisms of his work, talking about how his art style was creepy and unnerving, looked back at the sum of all his animation and game developing experience, and instead of giving up, said, "Alright, check this out."
This is, God help me, Five Nights at Freddy's.
Hey, what's happening, everyone? This is Yummy Mash.
Hello, everybody. My name is Markiplier, and welcome to Five Nights at Freddy's, an indie horror game that you guys suggested en masse, and I saw that Yummy Mash played it.
But, I was watching the download count on that. 5,000 downloads, 10,000, 15,000, 20,000.
Did you think it was going to, get a huge reaction on the internet?
No, of course not. It taught me to never take for granted how special it is to have a group of people who are
Indy4N404 dice, menos mal que no nos vimos todo el vídeo como tú dijiste.
eager to play what you make. To have a fan base, of people who care about these characters in the game, that is the only thing that matters.
I would like to give a big thank you to the people on the Lost Scott Games Discord server. Without their help, this video would be extraordinarily more difficult to make. Especially Phil LeBrave, Alex Diaz, and more difficult.
Pero, ¿no es él, Phil LeBrave?
Phil LeBrave, Alex Diaz, and Morgan Pander. I would also like to thank Aiden for technical support. I also now have a Patreon. Those names scrolling past are some of my patrons, and if you would like to become a patron to support the channel and get access to behind the scenes, my Discord, and more, you can click the link in the description below. Anyway, my name is Solar Sands, and goodbye.
Qué buen vídeo, tío.
Imagine all the late night.
Es cine. Qué buen vídeo. He aprendido un montón de Scott que no sabía, ¿eh? ¡Wow! Qué pasada, ¿no? ¡Wow! Y luego está el comentario de Scott Cawthon que dejó por el vídeo. Y dice... Es muy halagador, humillante y también un poco vergonzoso tener todo dispuesto así. Los buenos, los no tan buenos, los malos, los algo malos, los malos y los desesperados también. A veces desearía poder volver atrás y modificar un poco esta historia. Pero es... Bueno, ya no. Pero es lo que es. Y tienes mucha razón al decir que no soy un genio. Aprecio el cuidado que tuviste al presentar todo esto. Está muy bien hecho. Scott. Por favor, chicos, ahora no. Scott aprueba el vídeo. Scott aprobó el vídeo. Qué bueno, tío, qué locura. Ha estado súper chulo. He aprendido un montón que no sabía de Five Nights at Freddy's. Wow. Qué buen vídeo, tío. Me ha flipado.